All right, let's jump right in. Today on The Explainer, we're diving into a really complex topic, one that's filled with some powerful images and, let's be honest, some very strong opinions. The role of women in Islam.
So, when I say women in Islam, what's the first image that pops into your head? For a lot of us, thanks to what we see in the media or in headlines, it's probably a pretty specific picture, right? Often it's an image of oppression. A woman who's veiled, sidelined, and whose freedoms are really restricted.
But is that stereotype the whole story? That's the big question we're tackling. We're going to try to untangle all of this by looking at the actual foundational principles of the faith and separating them from the local cultural practices that have kind of grown up around it over centuries.
Okay, so to really get a grip on the kind of change Islam introduced, we have to go back in time. We need to look at what life was actually like for women in the Arabian Peninsula before Islam ever came onto the scene. This era, this pre-Islamic period, has a name. It's called Jahiliyyah, which basically translates to the age of ignorance. And believe me, when you see the contrast between how women were treated then and the principles Islam brought in, it is absolutely night and day.
I mean, the reality back then was, it was bleak. Women were literally seen as property. They couldn't inherit anything, couldn't own property. They were often pushed into forced marriages with zero say in the matter. And even worse, the practice of female infanticide was a real thing, all because having a daughter was sometimes seen as a source of shame. That was the starting point. That's the baseline we're talking about.
And then, into this environment, comes this totally new model, a revolutionary new way of thinking. And it wasn't just laid out in scripture. It was lived out, day by day, through the personal example of the Prophet Muhammad himself.
And this quote right here says so much. He's talking about his first wife, Khadijah. Now get this, Khadijah wasn't just his wife. She was a powerful, respected, and super successful businesswoman in her own right. In fact, she was his boss. She hired him. The way he valued her as a true partner and a trusted advisor, it completely flipped the script and set a whole new standard.
And this wasn't a one-off thing. This pattern of respecting and empowering women just keeps showing up with these incredible early female figures. You've got his daughter, Fatimah, who was seen as a leader. You've got Salama, who acted as a key political advisor on major treaties. These were not passive, silent women in the background. No way. They were absolutely central to building the foundations of this new community.
So, what happens next is that this new standard of respect, it gets formalized. It gets written down into actual, tangible, legal rights. And this is what transforms marriage from, an institution of ownership to a real partnership.
And for the 7th century, this was nothing short of a revolution. A woman's consent for marriage, it suddenly became mandatory, not negotiable. She was given her own independent wealth, called the mahr, a gift directly to her, not her family. She had full financial independence, and she even got the right to initiate divorce herself, something called khul. This was unheard of.
This verse from the Quran, live with them in kindness. It just perfectly captures this new spirit. And it's backed up by the Prophet's own words, when he said, the best of you is the one who is best to his wife. I mean, that is a complete 180 from that old pre-Islamic view of women as property.
Okay, so if these are the foundations, rights, respect, partnership, then you've got to ask, where do all those modern stereotypes about oppression come from? It's a fair question. So let's just dive in and tackle some of the biggest myths head on.
All right, first up, the hijab. It's probably the single most visible symbol we associate with Muslim women, right? And so often it gets framed as just one thing, a symbol of oppression, period. But if you talk to many women who wear it, you hear a totally different story. For them, it's the exact opposite. It's a choice. It's a voluntary act of faith, a part of their identity. Take someone like the Olympian fencer Ibtihaj Muhammad. For her, she said the hijab actually helps people focus on her athletic skill, not on her body or her appearance. And that really gets to the heart of it. For millions of women, it is a personal choice, an act of empowerment.
Okay, myth number 2, that Islam forbids women from getting an education or having a career. Well, let's look at the numbers, because they might surprise you. In a country like Iran, for instance, guess who makes up the majority of university students? Women. Over 60%, according to UNESCO. Now that really complicates that simple, easy narrative that the religion itself is what's holding women back from education.
And it's not just about attendance. We're talking about reaching the absolute pinnacle of academia. Maryam Mirzakhani, an Iranian woman, became the first and so far only woman in history to win the Fields Medal. That's basically the Nobel Prize for mathematics. It's the highest honor there is.
All right, what about leadership roles? Is there some kind of religious glass ceiling that stops Muslim women from being in charge? Well, if you look at the world stage, the evidence just doesn't back that up. You have women who have been president of Indonesia, which, by the way, is the most populous Muslim country on earth. You have Nobel Peace Prize winners. You have human rights defenders. You have women on the ground mediating civil wars. The leadership is there, at every level.
And this, right here, brings us to what might be the single most important point of this whole explainer. If the religion itself seems to grant these rights and inspire these incredible achievements, then where do the restrictions that we do see in certain places actually come from?
This is where we have to draw a really sharp line between religion and culture. It's so critical. Take the famous driving ban in Saudi Arabia. That was a government policy, a local rule, until 2018. You can't find a single religious text that forbids a woman from driving. Or think about forced marriage. It's a tribal or cultural tradition in some places that directly contradicts the core religious requirement that a woman must give her consent.
So, let's wrap this up. When you look at the foundational texts and the early history, the picture that emerges is pretty clear. At its very beginning, Islam gave women rights, social agency, and financial independence that were, for their time, completely revolutionary.
You can draw a straight line from the pioneering businesswoman Khadijah, right at the dawn of the faith, all the way to modern-day icons like Nobel winners Malala Yousafzai and Shirin Ebadi, and academic giants like Maryam Mirzakhani. It's a legacy, a powerful, consistent legacy of empowerment that's often fueled by faith.
And that really leaves us with one final big question to chew on. If we can see this huge gap between religious principle and cultural practice when it comes to the role of women, it kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other common beliefs that we just take for granted might be worth taking a second closer look at?